I'd like to welcome everyone to our inaugural public event of the Gender Research Institute's new series of public talks called Times of Crisis. Starting today with our alum panelists and talk by the distinguished Dennis Goldberg, and ending on May 16th with the visit of Angela Davis, the Gender Research Institute is going to host a powerful and invigorating set of guests whose thinking and social activism dovetail with the mission of the Gender Research Institute. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Anabel Martin. I direct the Gender Research Institute, and for the past 10 months, I've been working to bring Times of Crisis together with a fabulous team of people, and I'm going to briefly say who those folks have been. Grid Steering Committee, formed by Professors Amy Allen, Lisa Valdez, Daniel Benjamin, the director of the Dickey Center, Jennifer Fleury, Veronica Fuchner, Susan Pepin, and Ross Virginia, and an indefatigable office support staff, Office Manager Nancy O'Brien. Where's Nancy? Nancy O'Brien sitting in the back. An angel put Nancy in Grid's way. And student interns, Stephanie Chavez-Yenter. Stephanie, where are you? Stephanie? Stephanie will be the future director of Grid. Stephanie. Jennifer Gargano, recent addition. Jenny, wonderful addition. Tanita Zubi, our Kosovo intern, and Sanders Davis, who is not here this afternoon. From website design to ordering birthday cake candles, from recruiting our first postdoctoral fellow from 303 applicants, wow, to writing and applying for State Department funding for our Kosovo development grant, to designing student internships in New York and India, Guatemala. No task is too small, too menial, or demanding for this team. I'm very, very fortunate to be working with this group of people who share Grid's goals and understand its place at Dartmouth with such intensity, and who make meetings feel like family gatherings, but good family gatherings. None of this would be possible without the generous institutional support that Grid receives from the Dartmouth administration as well. And this comes from various levels. Some of you might recall that interim president Carol Folt set aside last year generous funding for Grid's initial pilot years, which is a 4-year experiment in a project that wishes to bring together Dartmouth's gender-related work in all of its divisions and across the professional schools. Our core is interdisciplinary, our focus is domestic and international, and our goal is to be great translators of these qualities into our teaching, research, and linkages with civil society. Grid also receives stewardship from the Office of the Provost as we work closely with Vice Provost for International Initiatives, Lindsay Whaley, and with the Office of the Dean of Faculty, for we are also advised by Associate Dean for Interdisciplinary and International Programs, Lynn Higgins, and by our unflinching Dean of Faculty, Mike Massanduno, who has graciously agreed to say a few opening words today. President Hanlon has also expressed excitement about our three-legged approach, and let me briefly explain to you what that is. Times of Crisis is 3 things. 1, this public lecture series. 2, a new experiential learning course that Grid offers through the Women's and Gender Studies program for majors, minors, and interested students. And 3, a faculty, student, staff research seminar. This year, it's composed of 28 fellows, 11 undergraduate students, 2 graduate students, 2 staff members, and 13 faculty members from across the disciplines, professional schools. We have representation of the humanities, the social sciences, the Tuck Business School, Geisel, and TDI. We meet almost on a weekly basis to study the topic of crisis in an interdisciplinary fashion and in its many manifestations. And a few examples, what I mean. We've been looking at the erosion of social justice, social inequities, and their effects on individuals, families, and communities, to the exhilarating moment of transformation that all moments of crisis also offer. We base our discussions on the insights offered by the texts either written or created by Grid's guest speakers. And then we meet a second time as a group, which is a very special privilege, with each speaker to discuss their work directly with them, as we did today with the distinguished Dennis Goldberg and our alum panelists. We hope this three-legged approach will bring something to everyone, So please enjoy the visits of today's speakers and the upcoming talks by John Berger, Noam Chomsky, David Knockway, Amy Goodman, Nancy Frazier, Jennifer Klugman, and Angela Davis. We expect students, faculty, staff, and all other community members to be exhilarated to hear our guests and speak about the struggles of social change, about the place for dignity in social justice, about formulating change as a multidimensional, fertile, and tense dialogue between issues of class, race, sexuality, gender, ethnicity, language, legality. We expect tense debate, passion, and thoughtfulness. In other words, we expect times of crisis to be a series of lessons in democracy that will intellectually stimulate us all for months to come. Thank you. It's my privilege now to invite Dean of Faculty, Mike Massanduno, to say a few opening words.
Thank you, Annabelle, and it's great to be here. It's also a great pleasure to be part of the launch, not only of the Times of Crisis series, but also of GRID itself, which is remarkably less than a year old. When interim president Carol Folt approached me about this, it was really about a year ago, she said, you know, if we were to create what has become GRID, what would be your goals for it as Dean of Faculty? And I said, my first and most important goal would be that you pay for it. And she agreed, which was, I think, remarkable and generous. And I was fully confident that once this thing got on the ground, it would find its own legs and we wouldn't have to worry too much about paying for it, at least not for a little bit of time. But I said, but substantively, much more importantly, I saw three goals, and they end up being those sort of three parts of the three-legged stool that Annabelle was talking about. One, I felt that what we really would want to do here would be to create at Dartmouth the best institute for scholarly research on gender, bar none, and in the broadest possible sense too. Not in the narrow sense that a lot of people stereotype gender studies or gender research, but in the broadest sense of helping both students and faculty and everyone else think about the connections between gender and political life, social life, cultural life, personal life, right? A whole range of issues that intersect with gender in a very broad interdisciplinary way. Because when we looked around the faculty, we said, we have really tremendous resources here already, and if we could knit these people together into a common research enterprise, we'd have something truly special. And I think that's what we have been trying to create here, and I think with Annabelle's direction, we've come a long way in a very short amount of time. Secondly, I wanted this to be a place for innovative teaching and an innovative curriculum, and I'm delighted that a new course, I think it's Women and Gender Studies 96, is coming along, which will be a research seminar for undergraduates on a lot of these topics. And it plays, I think, to one of the great strengths of Dartmouth, which is involving undergraduates in that research enterprise, right? So this is really a peculiar thing in a lot of ways about Dartmouth, but it's emphasized especially in this GRID program, which is involving undergraduates directly in the work of creating knowledge about these issues. And I think that's really a special opportunity for undergraduates, and frankly a special opportunity for faculty, because we've got some pretty extraordinary undergraduates to work with here. And then finally, the third part of this is engagement. You know, and it seems to me that these issues are far too important to be left to a conversation of academics for only academics. And I really appreciate the efforts that the Institute has made to reach out and to engage the broader campus, the broader community, and really the world on these kinds of issues. And it seems to me that teaching, research, and engagement inevitably have to go together if you're going to enhance all three. And so I'm really excited by this particular program because it's a nice example of how they intersect, and the new course as well. Because what's really particular, I think, and extraordinary about the GRID program is that it doesn't have compartmentalized research, teaching, and engagement, but it's weaving them all together in this particular series, in the new course, and in a lot of the other things going on. And just to top it off, in less than 10 months, the Institute has already been the recipient of a major State Department grant. Go figure, the State Department is funding Dartmouth and funding something in the humanities. I really like that, and it's something I tell the scientists every day. You're not the only ones who get grants around here. So I'm really proud to see that. And finally, I'd just like to thank Annabelle for, I would like to say her tireless leadership, but I know she's tired. But it's a good tired. It's like I just ran 10 miles tired, not the I just cleaned my office tired, right? So it's the tired that comes with positive benefits. So I really appreciate all you've done, and the other faculty members who have been involved in this, and you mentioned many of them. It's been a great collective leadership effort. So I hope everyone enjoys today's panel and the lecture and the whole series, and I'm looking forward to it as well. So thank you all.
Okay, so we'll have the first part of this afternoon will be a conversation with our three alums. These are three individuals who have used their Dartmouth education to better critique and reform particular sets of social inequities that have spoken to each one of them in a very special and different way. We'll hear three distinct experiences about the complexities of the world of social activism and just how stubborn social justice actually is, and how their Dartmouth education was somehow a piece of that puzzle, or helped in that, on that road, or made it more difficult, or today at lunch, we all learned that the three of you share that you were Dickey Center Lombard Fellows as well. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's a coincidence. Last year, our three alums who came, out of three people who were selected randomly, also were three Lombard Fellows. So there's something going on there.
Known. That should be known.
Yes.
Like that.
Okay. We'll go until about 4:15 or so, and then we'll have a little break, and then at 4:30 we'll have Dennis's keynote address. So I'll introduce. I think I'll just introduce the three of you now, and then you'll just go. So we'll start with Javad. Javad Jaghai is a 2012 graduate of Dartmouth who did not graduate with a major, for he spent his senior year as a senior fellow writing a qualitative study of gay and lesbian histories and possibilities in contemporary Jamaica. Javad, you were connected with African and African American studies, geography, women's and gender studies, anthropology. Okay. With generous funding from the Dickey Center, Javad was able to return to Jamaica to bring together his life experiences, education, and voice to raise awareness about the lives of LGBT-identified persons. Recognizing the critical importance of visibility, he pursued opportunities to reach national audiences by television and radio, for he was the public education officer of a local LGBT organization. And this work exposed him to scrutiny, harassment, and the threat of violence. But in his words, it was liberating to represent myself, truthfully in the face of intense opposition. I am most proud of the connections I made with the countless individuals who reached out to share their own stories, show solidarity, and express gratitude. Javad is the claimant in a landmark domestic challenge to colonial Jamaica's 1864 anti-sodomy law in the Jamaican Supreme Court. The law is at the center of vigorous debates today about the respectability of homosexual desire and the citizenship rights of gender and sexual minorities. And in his free time, he's a PhD student in sociology at Yale. In first year, right, Javad? First year. Susan, at the end of the table. Susan Struble. Susie Struble is an organizing member of Dartmouth Change, a coalition of alumni, students, faculty, and general Dartmouth community members working to end campus sexual violence and harassment. She is a member of the class of 1993. She was also involved in creating Greeks Against Rape while on campus, a student-led effort that facilitated discussions around sexual violence, consent, and gender relations in fraternities and sororities. After graduation, she volunteered for several years at a domestic violence crisis center in Wyoming while trying to become a better writer. She says that she failed at that and then moved to San Francisco area, where she worked in various roles in the tech industry. In each role that she's had, such as Director of Global Government Strategy for Sun Microsystems, she's been involved in building global support for policy, legislation, and new technological ideas. And finally, Danielle Coleman is also a graduate of Dartmouth from 2012. Danielle graduated with a major in sociology and African American studies. She is trilingual. While at Dartmouth, she traveled to over 12 countries, travel that included representing research in Peru on behalf of the African American Studies program. After graduating with honors, she was awarded a Lombard Fellowship through the Dickey Center for International Understanding to Cape Town, South Africa. There, she engaged in writing policy analyses surrounding the human rights of sex workers, created a sex work feminist activist group with various women, and actively lobbied with sex workers surrounding their human rights. And today she's going to speak to us about that. In June, she'll be moving to Paris for another adventure. So please help me in welcoming them back to Dartmouth.
Let's see if this thing is working. Hello, everyone. We're good? Awesome. I would like to start by saying a special thank you to the organizers of the Times of Crisis lecture series for inviting me to be a part of this panel. Dartmouth provided me with countless opportunities to develop my character and to pursue my passions. Returning to the community to share with you today is one of the ways that I show gratitude. Thank you in advance for your presence, your willingness to question even the assumptions you live by, and for your active engagement. By the end of my fellowship year in Jamaica, everything I thought I knew about myself and about the world no longer applied. The convictions that motivated my return home to work as an activist for LGBT equality no longer compelled me to action. After months of reflection, I think I'm finally ready to try to piece together some of the ideas that emerged out of my experiences. Boston, August 2, 2013. After staying with a friend for 2 nights, we rushed to South Station at 7 a.m. to catch a bus to New Haven. As soon as we joined the queue, the plastic bag with 2 bottles of Snapple we had just bought slipped from my sleepy fingers, and the sound of glass smashing into concrete reverberated through the terminus. Pink and purple juices flowed like lava away from their source into the path of anxious travelers. There's something about the spectacular way that glass breaks. Even when it's a cup or a vase I won't miss, I feel a sense of loss. This feeling lingers as you try to pick up the scattered pieces. As we sat on the bus, we put ourselves at ease. After all, we made it. The engine of the bus came alive and the bus started to move. Seconds later, an ear-splitting explosion went off, sending shockwaves through my body. Images from the Boston Marathon bombings flashed through my mind. I clung to him, and we exchanged terrified glances. Fiberglass fragments flew through the air across our faces, and I waited for death to take me. My spirit was broken so many times during my childhood that by the time I first left Jamaica at the age of 17, only a pile of shards remained. Throughout my time at Dartmouth, my soul lay in fragments as I searched for ways to connect the disparate parts of my human experience. Studying the lives of LGBT Jamaicans as a senior fellow gave me the tools to better understand the society and to make sense of my alienation from it. After completing my thesis, I was ready to return home. I wanted to confront my people. I wanted them to look me in the eye and see their humanity. I wanted them to embrace me and welcome me home. After becoming the claimant in the first domestic challenge to the colonial laws which criminalized consensual intimacy between men in private, I wondered if I had revealed too much about myself. Did I push too hard? Did I sacrifice too much? I met my soulmate in Jamaica during my fellowship year, and we planned to move to New Haven together for me to start my PhD at Yale. I had everything I wanted for myself, and I feared, with good reason, that another broken soul might decide I am undeserving of life. An alarm sounded every time my apartment door opened, and every time I wondered if the mob had finally come. I was destroying myself with the fear of imminent loss, the loss of a future, the loss of my life, the fear that even shards could splinter further into dust. As we waited for another bus to arrive, he slipped one of his hands into one of mine and hugged me tightly. In a moment of clarity, I agreed that the mobs would never follow me to the United States, and for once I felt free, in love. I didn't feel the need to explain or defend myself anymore. I didn't feel the need to wrestle with protectors of the status quo to prove my humanity. I was born in Jamaica, a small island in the Caribbean archipelago that is home to a population of less than 3 million people. My father's family is descended from Indian indentured laborers who fled India in search of a better life. My mother is the direct descendant of Africans transported across the Atlantic as cargo to be sold as slaves to opportunistic, exploitative, and brutish businessmen. I say this without malice because I recognize the universal transhistorical presence of the motivation to subjugate, pillage, and profit for power. I grew up in a community that is surrounded by abandoned plantations. One of them, where 3 of my grandparents worked as farmhands, is now a tourist attraction. As a child in St. Mary, I often retraced the haunted steps of my African and Indian ancestors. While independence in 1962 created new opportunities for social and economic advancement, many families are still stuck in centuries-long poverty cycles that span continents. Jamaica is a very oppressive place for a freedom seeker. Imagine the dogmatism of my parents intersecting with Christian fundamentalism, which then fuses with slave society colonial respectability. At a very young age, I became conscious of the negative significations projected on my body in Jamaican spaces. Until very recently, I felt like an outsider, a resident alien, a sea fish in fresh water. Public policing of non-alignment with the overlapping social codes was aggressive, so despite my best efforts to mask my divergence, my so-called effeminacy, and stubborn insistence on questioning the dangerous idea of normal became huge liabilities. It is no secret that the socialization process is violent. We persistently question diversity, complexity, nuance. We deny agency, individuality, freedom, until we finally arrive at the model citizen in a given society, the respectable human being. At first, I did not know which behaviors were inappropriate, so I had to pay attention to my thoughts and actions. In other words, I became a stranger to myself at the same time when I realized I was a stranger to my society. Inevitably, I internalized how I imagined my community perceived me. My self-esteem plummeted and stayed there for most of my life. Over time, I distanced myself from the very idea of to be Jamaican, an expectation I had no more desire to satisfy. I became a daydreamer on the hour-long bus rides to school each day, wishing to fly away across the sea to someplace else. My mind became a refuge because I could dream of possibilities that inspired me to seek knowledge and plot my escape. There were no safe spaces, and there were no safe people, so I had to create for myself a place of awareness and redemption. Tragically, I was not always successful, because when a colonial gaze penetrates the soul, it roots itself wherever it finds insecurity. I had the good sense to accept the terms of my struggle and affirm my right to life, but I could not escape my entrapment within the systems of awareness available to me. In time, a generous scholarship set me free. When I left Jamaica to study abroad in 2006, I had a schoolboy's understanding of the society. My suitcases carried clothes, and along with them I brought pain, trauma, and resentment, still fresh, to my new homes in Canada and the United States. Before coming to Dartmouth, I attended an international high school with 200 students from 100 countries. While we were surrounded by mind-boggling diversity, there was an understanding that each of us had a rightful place at the college and that every student was entitled to the protections of the community. Our disagreements sometimes created tensions, but our conversations and our negotiations were always civil. We knew each other by name, and we treated one another with respect. We said hello with hugs along the pathways in the forest. We said goodbye in the syntax and flow of tears. My high school wasn't a utopian community, but the institution was oriented towards sustaining inclusive spaces in which students with dissimilar beliefs, interests, and ambitions could find common ground and friendship. In times of crisis, we erred on the side of compassion, generosity, fairness, and compromise. This alternative practice of community inspired me to envision novel ways of relating, thinking, becoming that bring us closer to our most enlightened selves and to the ideal communities we aspire to live in. Returning to Jamaica after graduation in 2012 gave me an opportunity to reevaluate the society from a new perspective. I wasn't bitter anymore, and I genuinely wanted to understand why we are indifferent to the broken souls around us, why inclusivity feels like an unfair compromise, and whether there is a mismatch in the expectations of citizens and the objectives of the institutions which govern our lives. The phobias and isms that plague us are not just symptoms of maladaptive socialization or inadequate policy interventions. They are predictable outcomes of specific institutional arrangements, philosophical perspectives, and historical legacies. As activists, we can shake the mango tree until the end of time, but only the ripe and rotten mangoes will fall, and only for a few months during mango season each year. This, I believe, is the crisis our generation of activists must confront. We are tending to trees we did not plant, growing fruits we cannot eat, shaking a trunk that is sometimes centuries old and deeply rooted in the fertile plains of socialized minds. We already know what we don't like: racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, anthropocentrism, crony capitalism, power-hungry egotism, economic, cultural, and political imperialism. What's good for me is good for you, fundamentalism. But what do we like? What kinds of communities are we trying to create, and on what scale? What tools do we have, and which do we need to acquire? What institutions would we build instead? Would our laws read like the Ten Commandments, or can they be a story or a song? I used to describe myself as an outsider because I imagined myself to be on the periphery of a world I could not join. In conversations with insiders, it is difficult to escape the subject positions they project and impose, the condition of otherness. While working in Jamaica, in the popular imagination, I was the homosexual outsider, disease vector, shameless sinner, and a puppet of the all-powerful international gay rights lobby. When we internalize and affirm how others perceive us, we are displacing ourselves from the center of our universe. We imagine the center to be behind someone else's eyes, in the body of this or that type of privileged person, or in the ethos of an institution such as a national government. In so doing, we reproduce and reaffirm their stratifications and hierarchies. We intuitively understand that this exchange is illegitimate, but it is difficult to identify the mechanisms by which the exchange takes place. We are left with feelings of insecurity, which grow every time we nourish them with self-pity. Today, my vision of myself is not limited by the vagaries of human social interaction or the parochial cultural norms of any one society. To say I feel like an outsider would mean I have created a space in my consciousness for someone else's perception of me to thrive. To be clear, I'm aware of the ways that my body and speech are marked as divergent, but I see myself as both a participant and an observer of the social worlds I inhabit. I am still the owner of my body and the pilot of my mind. I left campus almost 2 years ago as a gay activist, but today the label seems woefully inadequate. It cannot bear the weight of my vision of myself because it only refers to one aspect of my life experiences, one of the identity constructs I inherited, one of the ways that my body and behavior are read by strangers. The social dimensions of our lives are entangled with economic, political, and spiritual obligations and commitments. I want to be a part of an activist movement that works at the intersections of these interlocking, mutually reinforcing systems. What insights could we gain by evaluating them in conversation with each other? That is, how we experience them, instead of as separate disciplines and movements. As a thinker and an activist, I am interested in the legacy we will leave for future generations. How can we lay the foundation for sustained critical analysis that humans not yet born can appropriate, build on, and transform to meet the needs of their future lives? What novel perspectives can we articulate that will propel conversations about social and economic injustice into new spaces beyond university classrooms, academic journals, and sectarian interests? How can we move beyond identification of injustice and analysis of its effects to institutional change and the pursuit of alternative outcomes? The world has never before been all the things that we collectively aspire for it to be. Those of us who hunger for a more inclusive world with less inequality have to grow our capacity to exercise patience. We have to recognize that we are products of the very societies we question. We are entangled in the webs we seek to unravel. We must always remember that change takes time. Jamaican is the language of my home and my community. It was invented by enslaved Africans using the tools available to them for image making and expression. Their legacy and my inheritance is a constant reminder that even while living in the most oppressive situations, the resilience of the human spirit shines through when we use our agency to refashion the tools of our oppression into objects of beauty, fascination, and wonder. Our biggest challenge as individuals and communities should be to figure out how to engineer ways to make our lives, this chance encounter with the mysteries of the universe, a beautiful experience. While we plant new seeds and watch them grow, let us build communities with like-minded folk around us and create oases of liberation wherever we are. Be more of what you would like to see in the world. Treat others with generosity and pursue opportunities for respectful engagement. Forgive yourself for past ignorance. Forgive others for their insensitivity to your pain. Every callous heart is encrusted in layers of misguided convictions. Where does one begin to chip away at the scales of misrecognition and misunderstanding? I am forever inspired by Jamaican freedom seekers who stay alive, strive, and find beauty in life despite pervasive hostility to the fact of gender and sexual diversity. We cannot always change the circumstances of our immediate reality, but with some training, we can control how we respond to them. We can control whether we allow dehumanizing perspectives to penetrate our minds at all. We get to decide how much time we spend thinking, talking, and writing about our disadvantages, how many times we revisit unresolved sites of entanglement and scenes of trauma, how many more people we will allow to rub salt into our wounds which have not yet healed. My spirit tends towards reconciliation and peace, not antagonism and strife. My protest is not a fight, it is an act of love. My protest is a demonstration of concern for myself and for others, the maligned who we stereotype and condemn, the broken souls who wail in agony generation after generation who we do not hear, the castaways who are nursing traumas we do not see, the downtrodden who wear keloid scars and gaping wounds, emblems of their struggle, who we scorn and dismiss. I believe we have important lessons to teach the world, but we can only teach those who care to learn. So what can we do for ourselves? What can we do for ourselves with the wealth of perspectives we already have? We know our societies won't save us. In fact, they created the conditions we suffer from. So can we save ourselves? As a child, I could not escape the socializing influences of my family, school, church, government, and society. But the more I come to know, the more I unknow. We are living in the future of every generation before us. In earlier times, fellow humans in positions of enormous privilege and power developed the hegemonic ideas and systems we are grappling with today. They used the tools available to them to understand their world and to devise strategies to shape it, remake it, even control it. As the inheritors of the legacies of the civilizations that came before us, we have a responsibility to use our observations, our knowledges, and our imaginations to create new possibilities for human achievement and liberation. To get there, we need new models. To invent them, we need a thought revolution. Thank you.
Oh, I'm too emotional. I really, really am. I'm going to do my best. This has been an amazing time here, and I'm eternally grateful to be invited back. It was joyful, of course, getting off the Dartmouth coach bus and being back in Hanover. My heart sang, and it was a spring day, and it felt great. And one of the first things I saw was a poster that Johnny Clegg and his band was coming back to campus, and it reminded me of when I think it was my freshman fall, actually, he came, and the last time I saw him play, and we danced for hours in Webster Hall, and just what an amazing experience that was with all my freshman classmates here on Dartmouth. We hadn't yet parted into all our little separate ways and our own little separate cliques and all that. It was pretty close to freshman week. So I'm sorry. We were asked to talk about gender, our experiences at Dartmouth and how they led us to be the advocates that we are and activists that we are. I don't know that I look at myself that way. I look at you two and I look at others in the crowd, and I don't feel that I'm walking exactly in the same hallowed footsteps as you, but I'm trying. And to talk about gender, how our experiences at Dartmouth were shaped by gender. The title of this is Time of Crisis, and my mind all day has just been, it's I don't know. I'm not really sure what to say, and I'm so overwhelmed as well, speaking quite a bit today and hearing from Dennis Goldberg, and the physical embodiment of what you've witnessed and what you've done. It's just very powerful for me, and I'm going to do a very gendered thing right now and be the girl and cry, right? And I watched a little bit last night of the trial from a few weeks ago of the two Dartmouth undergraduates, the rape trial. And I'm deeply disturbed and moved by that. And I am so sick of the violence. I'm so tired of it. You know, my time at Dartmouth, even before I stepped on campus, was marked by gender and violence. I was raped here when I visited when I was 16. I'm not the only student who still matriculated and was raped. I know of 3 others around my class. And I wish that I could unpack this. I wish I had your brain, Javed. I wish I had your time right now to be so thoughtful. And it's partially, I think, as well from your experiences. I mean, look at who I am. I look like a Barbie doll, right? I haven't been forced from the beginning of my life to think too hard about what's come to me or where I am. I still haven't been able to figure out the role of gender and all this. I don't think I can describe it easily. But that started my time at Dartmouth. And when I entered here as a freshman year, my rapist tracked me down and sexually assaulted me in my dorm room. And my time here was all about gender. I got nothing but nasty, sexualized, horrific, this is before the web, really, right? Stuffed in my hymn box. So today you guys have Board at Baker. Awesome, right? You have all these internet-driven things. We had hand little written notes that would be shoved under my door in my hymn box or such. And at what point did the scales come from my eye? At what point did I realize that things were just so wrongly amiss, and what was my role in trying to change this? As for so many of us, it took, for me at least, it took getting away. It actually took getting the hell out of this place. And I went and studied, I went to the London School of Economics for a while. I was a government and economics. Those were my majors here, though I'm still angry at Dartmouth because they actually did not accept my economics studies over at London School of Economics to actually apply towards an economics degree here or major here. So I'm fudging a little bit when I say I'm a double major. But it took being over there and being away and being in the just crazy, joyful cultural life that was London for me, and being at LSE and with so many international students. And I happened to spend a lot of time with a lot of Jamaicans there. That made me think a little bit differently when I came back on campus. And actually, what did I study at Dartmouth? The economics thing actually did drive me to do the activism that I had kind of done in my job in 15 years of working in the tech industry. The economic study, for me, I was very interested in the utilitarian, rational actor aspects of corporations and how we see them as entities and how we study and think of them as entities. And back in those days, late 80s, early 90s, the tech industry was just kind of really starting to boom, and the notion of intellectual property in that area and globalism was just fascinating to me. So my senior thesis proposal here, which I was, granted the opportunity to do, but unfortunately couldn't complete because I couldn't get the data I needed, was looking at the intersection of these things. Basically, I wanted to understand, how did corporations change their positions in global trade agreements and in these different organizations that manage trade based upon their level of vertical integration and whether they were doing hardware or software. I wanted to see how this notion of software patents and hardware patents were being promulgated throughout the world and how the corporations were driving them, basically. That fascinated me. But I left here a pretty wounded person, as many of us do. Interestingly enough, in two ways, I ran to the mountains of Wyoming, and I just became a skier. And like I said, earlier, as Annabelle introduced me, I tried to become a writer, and I tried to write my way through some of this. But it's interesting that you can't run away from things, and they both, in both areas of interest, my activism, if you will, around the violence that too many of us experience because of our gender, and also around how we use intellectual this idea of property, what's mine or yours, even in the realm of ideas and things that are intangible around software. How we have exported that around the world, and how that is deeply affecting the abilities of economies to get online and economies to grow, and for people to access information, to be part of this networked world. My corporate life that's what I did for Sun Microsystems. I carved my own niche working. Yes, I was basically a corporate lobbyist, but I did something that I felt good about, and I worked with the World Trade Organization, WIPO, the United Nations and such, trying to carve out exceptions around intellectual property where there are technical standards. And I can't explain this simply if anybody to hear. It doesn't roll off my tongue, but basically the point was, where you need to connect with the world, that needs to be free. That needs to be a space where nobody is saying, you have to pay us to participate, right? Very important, and I was very lucky and still feel very fortunate to have found a business that actually felt the same way, and that was willing to send me around the world and work with the Access to Knowledge movement, which I was very involved with for many years. So that kind of came around for me. That was many years after I left. I spent about 5 years in Wyoming, moved back to the San Francisco Bay Area, and lo and behold, found myself at Sun creating this job for myself. And I thought, wow, that's crazy. That's kind of what I was thinking back at Dartmouth. That's what I was interested in. That was kind of my proposal. Wow, what do you know? That was about 10 years ago or so. I find myself back full circle again on the other issues that really mattered to me here. And, tied right into crisis. It's yet another crisis time at Dartmouth. It just never ends, right? The hits just keep rolling. And that's around the continued violence that too many of us feel, right, around our gender, sexual violence and harassment. And when that Rolling Stone article came out a few years ago, it pierced my veil of wanting to think things were different. Because I came back a few times for reunion, and I actually, we keep it in the family, right? So many of us of privilege here from Dartmouth, we marry into our own, right? So I married another Dartmouth graduate. He's class of 1990, and he wishes he could be here today, and he also wants to state his support for the Freedom Budget. Where was I going with that? So so many of us just leave, and we alumni don't really have a way. Those of us who are so often are just so dismayed by too much of our experience here, just don't have the heart perhaps to connect back to Dartmouth again and to connect back to what's going on, and we don't have a way. When that Rolling Stone article came out, I was just galvanized all over again, and so deeply, deeply frustrated that it was Groundhog Day still. Like I said, I'd been back on campus, and I could look around, and things looked different to me. It seemed different. People had piercings and tattoos, and there were openly gay men in fraternities, and that would have never happened when I was here on campus. So I could squint and feel to myself like, oh, it's good, things have changed. But that article just kind of brushed that aside for me. And, I couldn't help myself. I'm not very thoughtful. I can't really articulate why did I do this, but I just do. I happened to meet with President Wright, who was in San Francisco at that area, and asked him to, give me a download on all he knows. What did he do in his time here? Because I want to get involved again. And what I really think is missing is I'm not sure that there's ever been a big big coordinated effort of all the stakeholders. And this is what I did in the corporate world, right? Nothing got done at the UN or WIPO and so on. You had to persuade and meet each of the stakeholders and pull together some compromise and move it forward and inch it forward and so on, lay the groundwork. I'm like, I can do this here too. This is what I know how to do. And, you know, President Wright is under so many NDAs and confidentiality agreements, he really couldn't tell me much. But he did tell me who I should contact here on campus, and that was Professor Peter Hackett, who I called immediately the next morning, and Professor Hackett said, that's just crazy, because I just had a conversation literally 2 days ago with another alumni, Bob Wetzel. He's from the class of 76, I believe, 76 or 75, and we've been saying the same thing. And I said, well, hallelujah, I'm flying out next week, you know, let's go. And so that was the genesis of this coalition that we pulled together. And while we focus right now, and our focus has been the past 2 years, we kind of formed in 2012, but we really launched formally, ironically, before the, you know, yet another time of crisis at Dartmouth, right before the Dimensions protest last spring. We put our public website out. You know, and that was after a year of frustratingly difficult discussions and attempts to try to engage with the administration around this. You know, in that time, Dartmouth, you know, there's just a refusal. There's always a refusal from the status quo, right, to look at itself honestly and thoroughly and unflinchingly. And it's just so deeply frustrating to me that the administration still refuses to do this when the data so clearly shows that you need to. Because without that, if we don't talk about these things, race, class, gender, without that, we never get to the root causes. There's no light bulb moments for those on the other side who have to start thinking differently and acting differently and giving space for something different to grow. And there's a great example of this with the Bystander Initiative program that Dartmouth has in place. It ties directly back to gender, and it ties directly back with what you're trying to do with the Gender Research Institute here. You know, Dartmouth went down for about 6 or 8 months, was talking with the folks at the UNH Prevention Innovations Group, who are the national experts on, you know, sexual violence, interpersonal violence, and harassment prevention. They have a whole program that they initiated that they completely research-based and that they have for decades built up lots of evidence around through their own campus climate surveys that they do. It's called Bringing in the Bystander. Dartmouth was going to contract with them to bring this education here to campus, but they pulled out when they found out that there was another program that was also bystander intervention training, run again by a Dartmouth alumna, right? Because we always like to hire from within. But this other program didn't mention gender, didn't mention race, didn't mention class. This other program just talks more about personal responsibility and trying to give you the tools to be a hero and to step in and intervene without giving anybody a grounding as to why do these situations happen and why do they repeat themselves and what role do I have in this. Yeah. So deeply frustrating to me. And I think about what you're trying to do here with the Research Institute and what I hear from these folks at the Prevention Innovations Lab, what they've done so well. So what you're trying to do too is to pull together research and practitioners, right? And that was the solution that we had right there, right, just right over in Durham that we could have done, and the administration decided not to because it's too challenging for students. That's verbatim. You have to meet the students where they are. We can't make them uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable for students to talk about this. That's why we have this, whatever the hell it's called, Center for Community Prevention and Action, or whatever. No budget, no head of it. I mean, you probably know too much what the issues are with that. But the whole point of that, and this is driven by this outside consultant who's a Dartmouth alumna that we've hired, who's my sorority sister. She's my classmate. She should know better. I'm so angry. She said that we should have this, and it should be separate, because it's too difficult to talk about gender. We can't have gender in the title. We can't have violence in the title. Well, I'm sorry, that's just intellectually dishonest. You're just gonna get nowhere with that. And you know what, I know that, and that is research and evidence-based, right? If you look at the sociological research, you look at the psychological research, you look at these folks at UNH Prevention's Innovation Lab are doing, the reason their intervention programs are successful is because they talk about the core issues, right? I'm going on a bit of a tangent there, but thinking about Dartmouth, what did Dartmouth teach me? What have I learned? I certainly learned at Dartmouth that I was never the smartest person in the room. And listening to you two today, and to meeting many of you many of you here over the weeks that I've been visiting campus and trying to reconnect with students, that's just gets pounded into me all the time. I'm not the smartest person, but you know what I can do is be involved and be engaged. And I have a role and responsibility for that. And what I am very good at is figuring out who is smart, who is smart, and getting them together with this other very smart person, and then creating the right situation for that to happen. People like me are needed, right? So if there's anybody out there who thinks the same, damn, I'm not that smart, we need you. We need you connection makers. And that's what I'm trying to do with this Dartmouth Change organization. Again, I don't think that I could be wrong, but I'm not sure that there's ever been a consistent and coherent coalition of students and faculty and alumni getting together, saying the common thing, having a plan, working on it, And I think that is what is eventually needed to get us over the goal line here. And when I started this, I had a 10-year commitment to it. And I spoke with Danny Levin, who some of you may know, class of 2012. We had a great conversation. Both of us were like, all right, we're in it for 10 years. This is not a small task, right? This has been going on for generations at Dartmouth. What else did I want to say? Well, the other thing we're trying to do with this organization is to stop the cycle of 4 years advocacy here. And the burden is on the students just too much, and the burden is on the faculty too much, and we're losing the institutional memory every time we have a graduating class leave, right, and a new class come in. It's just so painfully inefficient, and it causes, while we all benefit perhaps in a very perverse way from the education we get here, this isn't what we signed up for, right? And we need to stop that cycle. And I'm hoping somehow with Dartmouth Change, like I said, although right now we are focused more on sexual violence and harassment, I think it's a cross-cutting issue. I'm hoping I'm looking at this as like a prototype. As we're doing this and trying to affect change, what can we learn? What's the institutional framework? What do I need to set up so that we can create something that's broader, that will be sustainable, and that is going to work? I don't know what that is in my mind. I don't really know, but I kind of feel like, honestly, I want to, as an alumni, it's really difficult to engage with the college on these issues. They shunt you over to the alumni group, right? And even there are affiliated, groups of, cultural affinity groups, or what do you want to call it. There's DGALA, right? The Gay and Lesbian Alumni Association. There's BADA, right? Their affiliation with the college makes it very difficult for them. They have a lot of constraints about what they can do. And it was very frustrating trying to work through the alumni, trying to work these issues up the change, because that's where I started, right? The first thing I did was call my alumni people and say, hey, I'm pissed off about this. What is the college doing? I want to hear their strategy. How are they measuring it? What are their goals? What's this data? And you guys know what the answer was about all that. So we need a way for alumni, because there are many, many, many of us. We are not alone, who feel differently and who care about this place, and who care and love deeply these students who are here. I love all of you. You all matter so much. We need a way for alumni to stay engaged outside of the mediation that the college wants to provide. So that's the larger global thing I want to do. And in my mind, I think maybe I just pay some students, and we'll go through the archives of all the Dartmouth articles and find out, who are you guys? Who are your compliments from the class of '79, right? The class of '87, class of '93, my class. I mean, we have thousands of these people out there. Let's find them. Let's bring them together, and let's say, hey, we need you together. We need your power. What else did I want to say? I guess I have to bring up, of course, then thinking about Dennis Goldberg, who's going to be coming up next, and the most dramatic, horrific, institutionalized, state-supported segregation that we've ever had, perhaps in this world, with the apartheid in South Africa. And then look at our own campus and think about the apartheid and the segregation that we have in our social system with the Greek houses. It just has to be brought up. And this is exactly why the administration does not want to talk about gender, right? That's exactly why they do not want to talk about gender and its role in violence and creating power differentials and so on, because they know that they're going to have to deal with something. And they have a multi-billion-dollar capital campaign coming up this fall. So I don't know what the solutions are for us with it, but it certainly is to try to speak together as one voice, to keep asking for data, show us how your programs are effective, show us how what you're doing is the right thing to do, show us the actual data of the student experience of what's actually happening here. The pressure eventually will make it work. We'll make some change here, I think, and I think we've already seen it in this area. I hope a bit, the pressure with bringing about a new sexual assault policy for the sanctioning guidelines, and how we will be investigating these cases. We've all kind of admitted to change is incremental, but somehow we're all going to get there together, and somehow at the end of this, we're all going to be able to focus on the joy and the love and the laughter and all the learning that is Dartmouth. That is, despite all these bad things and negative things and difficulties that perhaps many of us have experienced here, that still is ultimately why we come back and why we're here and why we love each other. So yeah, thank you for your time.
We're running a little late, but I think it would be lovely if we could have maybe 2 or 3 questions before we have a break, a short break. Yes.
Any of you could answer this, but how do you deal with following the work that you're passionate in? Actually, something to touch on. How do you deal with following work that you're passionate and feel called to do from your own lived experiences, and balance that with taking care of yourself?
It's difficult. It's very difficult.
How do you do activism work you feel called to do while also taking care of yourself?
Psychologically, my work was incredibly challenging, particularly because when I did have conversations, I realized I was being locked into a particular framework and a particular way of seeing things and a particular way of seeing me that didn't make sense. And so in a way, for example, you engage with the media and you think the media is interested in giving a balanced perspective. But in a debate in Jamaica with the media, you are presenting the alternative point of view, and the media is playing devil's advocate with the normative position and is therefore reinforcing the status quo. And so realizing that I was now caught in that very unproductive conversation, and that I don't think I was necessarily reaching people in the way I wanted to, because I was constantly responding to ridiculous and explaining and defending instead of actually revealing the truth of who I am in the complex ways that I would. And so I often went home feeling like I was just violated and that my perspective was not respected. And so at the same time, because I had an obligation to this organization, I had to do the work, and I had to do the work the way they'd been doing the work. And it was tough. Thankfully, I was surrounded by an awesome group of friends and family members who had my back. When I went home, they were there. There was dinner. There was company. There was a call from my dad or my mom, and that is what really made the difference. If I didn't have great friends, I would have lost my sanity.
I'd add that something that helped me out, speaking about family, is I have 2 little boys. And that adds a hell of a lot to the stress and anxiety, but it's family, and looking at them, I want them to be proud of me. I want them to someday say that their mom did something. And I'm motivated by making the world a little better place for them. Yeah, that helps a lot, looking at little kids.
I'm finding it really, really hard and irritating and annoying that I'm coming up against this C word, compromise, a little too often. And I guess I want to know how you all, what do you do, how do you manage it, because like we've all discussed there are these fundamentals that we need, right, are the necessities that we as human beings should have, but we live in an oppressive, capitalist, imperialist, post-colonialist system that does not allow us to have that, right? So, in thinking about what Javad said about coming up with new ways of living, of being, how can we make sure we have those things and still not compromise?
I find it interesting that we have this really well-articulated point of view about what we do not like, and we spend so much time talking about all the things we do not like instead of asking ourselves, okay, what do we like, and how do we create communities of people who support those values that we are trying to strive for. Because right now I think we're at a standstill. We're throwing ourselves into this enormous battle with the institutions that have shaped who we are. And it's challenging, and when change does happen, it happens on the terms of the institutions. And so that perspective does not work for me. It was killing me. I was in pain every day. And what's the point of trying to change the world if you're miserable? I didn't want to be miserable. So I went where there was love. I went where there was affirmation. I went where there was reflection and critical thought and people who could help me to invent and imagine ways that we could liberate ourselves. And we created those spaces. And sure, I was still living in a world. I had to come to terms with the chaos of the world and the realities of the world. And I think that's an okay thing. It's okay for me to find love and to be happy, even while understanding that these are bigger issues that we need to be aware of. It doesn't make sense to only focus on changing the bigger picture in hopes that in a generation or two, I can be happy. I want happiness now, and I'm going to claim that for myself.
If I could add to that a little bit in kind of a weird way, I tried to do that in the corporate world, actually. So every time that we would do something, we were trying to change the global legislation around something, we always would have a technology project. We'd have a model for that, a prototype for like, okay, this is how it could be. It could be like this. This is how it could work. This is how the different actors, China and Brazil would share their intellectual property around this is how we would build it. And then you would, first of all, it makes you feel a little better. Like it is possible, and I've defined kind of how that is. And then, back to your question about how do you deal with compromise? Well, if you're gonna, it's there. Right? But it's kind of heartening to have a model for and to be grounded in that model of what you want to see, and then to back out from that and be like, okay, this compromise over here, I can deal with that. This compromise over here, I can deal with that. It's easier to keep that going when you know the end result and you've got it in front of you, if that makes sense at all.
But how do you compromise with structures that you know are against you? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not as if we're trading, peanuts. We're trading lives. Like, we're trading souls. Like, you can't, what do you do?
Yeah, don't let it trip you up.
One last question? Yes.
So, to end on, I think a note that really resonated with me with Javed is I've been learning in some of the wonderful classes that I've been taking. One of them being Professor Rickford's Black Radicalism, the other being anything taught by Amy Bong, I keep continuously running into, this notion of symbolic violence, right? And one of the biggest violences is the violence of a society that cuts off people's abilities to imagine themselves free, right? So many people, myself included, just you cannot imagine yourself happy, you cannot imagine yourself free, loved, loving. So what has it been for you, all three of you, those moments, those tiny, those small things that have allowed you to imagine yourself free, that kind of took off the shackles?
I'll tell you what I did, but I'm not sure, that's definitely not the solution for everybody. And ultimately, people need to find what are the conditions they need to survive. And you need to put your thoughts, not into critiquing what you don't like, but into creating and sustaining the conditions that you need to survive. My solution was really, took a lot of me because it required that I re-examined every single thing I ever believed. Because I was operating with terminologies and frameworks that I learned in school and that I learned through socialization, which did not work for me. And so I had to go read history for myself. I had to go through the entire history of humankind to understand the evolution of the systems we have and why it is we're at the point we are today. So I could understand how to approach it. So I could understand what was possible, right? I also needed a moral framework, a value system that aligned with my own, and I realized there were none. So I had to invent one. And I don't mean by creating a religion, but by really asking myself, okay, Javed, what is it that is important to you? What are the things that you cannot compromise or that you refuse to compromise, right? What where can you go to find perspectives that resonate with your own and that you can draw upon? So for example, I found a lot of value in reading Eastern philosophies and religious traditions and recognizing that they place an emphasis on the self and perspective instead of seeing ourselves only in relationship to the society and in relation to everybody else around us, recognizing that we are individuals, recognizing that we have a unique perspective on the world, and that is of value, right? And that it's important and it's necessary. It's necessary that we always maintain a perspective on the world from our own center. Because the moment you allow what's going on out here to transplant what you see and know in here, the war is over. You've lost. You've lost. And so I can talk to anybody who's interested, but I spent a year thinking through what I experienced, what I saw. Okay, what did I need to now learn to figure out a better way for myself in this world? Because it's funny, you know what's funny to me? All the conversations human beings have tend to be about other human beings. And it's almost as if we're so stuck in the social systems we've created that we've forgotten we're living in a huge universe. We're living on an object that is rotating in space. This is a once-in-a-lifetime thing, and it's phenomenal to witness it. How can we be unhappy? Just think about yourself, not in relation to other human beings, but in relation to them, to the world, to the universe, to the galaxy, and recognize, prioritize, and see like what is important to you. Not just for the day-to-day, but in terms of your existence as a human being, having this experience with the mysteries of the universe that you might never experience again. So perspective. We need to shift perspective. We need to change priorities. We need to articulate what is important for us and pursue it with all that we have. That's how it worked for me. And I'm actually in a really, really good space now. Nothing stresses me out anymore. And I think I'm still able to engage, but in a way that does not destroy me.